Welcome to the second session. Quiet, please. Sorry. As I said, Michael Gove couldn't make it for various reasons, but we're very, very pleased that the Minister of Agriculture, Robert Goodwill, has stepped into his place and is going to be here in conversation with Rosie Boycott, Baroness Boycott, for 20 minutes, and then there will be time for questions afterwards, so don't hold back. He's a robust Yorkshire farmer, and he's got broad shoulders. So please welcome them both to the stage.
Good morning, and thank you, Robert, for coming. You reading up on all the things now about agriculture, this is a pivotal moment, isn't it, as we face leaving the European Union, a change in CAP, a change in the whole thing, and there's a new agriculture bill in the wings. Can you tell us what you see as the future going forward?
Yes. Rosie, when you said we face leave, I'm looking forward to leaving the European Union because very often the sort of innovation, the sort of tailor-made agricultural policies that we maybe would have had we been an independent state have been held back from us. I spent 5 years in the European Parliament, and it was often quite frustrating when other countries had different considerations and we were held back. When we've left the European Union, we intend to move forward with a new tailor-made agricultural policy, which will have at its centre environmental land management, which will mean that farmers are paid to deliver public goods rather than the current system where, as a farmer, I get a cheque every Christmas just for being a farmer. I think also, as far as the industry is concerned, there's a very good reason why I think they want to embrace this, not just because of the environmental benefits, but I got the impression in the past, if ever there were suggestions at a European level that subsidies should be cut back, we could guarantee a bunch of French farmers would start burning tyres on the Champs-Élysées, and very quickly the Commission would back off, and the member states, particularly the member states where the agricultural vote was central to them getting re-elected, would cave in. Under environmental land management, I'd quite like to think that if there was a suggestion that agricultural support would be cut back and that the environmental goods that were being delivered would also be cut back, that it would be Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth that we're demonstrating in Parliament Square saying, no, this is a scheme that's actually not only delivering sustainable agriculture and healthy food, but also delivering just the sort of things that our members and the taxpayers want to see delivered. So I'm very optimistic as we move into this 7-year transition from 2021 to 2027, as we move from direct payments to payments for public money for public good, that actually people will see those results on the countryside, and they will be on the side of the farmers as they help them through their taxes to deliver that.
So can we unpick what the public good is? There are some categories in it. Land management, water management, hedgerows. What are the things that you're particularly looking to farmers to do in the future? Leave aside the food production, which is something we'll come on to in a minute.
Well, the agriculture bill is the framework on which we will build this policy. And I think it would be, and there's a few of my colleagues in Parliament and elsewhere who are very ambitious and very keen to be more prescriptive at this stage. But I think at the moment what we need to do is put the framework in place, and then on that we can build the type of agricultural systems that we want to promote, the type of environmental projects that we want to see delivered, based on information that we're currently gathering through trials. We've got 48 trials at the moment, which we're ready to sign off, another 200 applicants waiting to come up, so we can actually see how some of these trials will work. And some of the existing work that we've already done, one in Wensleydale and one in Cambridgeshire, showing how we can see public goods being delivered, how the environment's being managed. So, I can understand people's enthusiasm and keenness to write the policy now, but it needs to be evidence-based. So I hope maybe even some people in this room will participate in some of these trials to show how we can deliver, the clean air, the cleaner water, the habitats, the public access, in some areas it might be water catchment. Some of these schemes may be individually farm-based, a bit like the current stewardship schemes, but some of them may be on a much wider area, particularly in the uplands. Some of them may be based on water catchment areas where we're working with water companies to try and prevent flooding and try and ensure that we can manage our water better. So I think it's a great opportunity. I'm looking forward to seeing the result of those trials coming in, and then we can actually build the policy.
So soil is not counted in that. It's counted as a private asset. Is that right?
Well, soil is one of the tools that we need to deliver these environmental benefits. So, soil health is not per se one of the things we wish to deliver, but without good soil health, we certainly can't deliver the other benefits we want to see. So it will be central to that. And many of the farming practices that farmers may wish to pursue to improve soil organic matter, because soil is a great carbon sink, to improve soil structure so we have less drainage problems. All those things are the sort of things I've seen out there in the field today in different ways that we manage soil. I mean, I'd say on my own farm, we were, back in the 1970s, we were min-till. And it was government policy that made us go back to ploughing because we couldn't burn straw anymore. And, I can remember, many farmers in the room can remember those wonderful days, dare I say, when, you had a good clean burn and you could tickle the top of the soil and you had a seed bed. We then had the problem that we couldn't burn the straw, so we had to incorporate the straw. And in those days, we didn't have the equipment of the sort we had there, so the best way to incorporate straw was to plough it in. And so we went back to ploughing. But of course, as we know from what the people here already know, I suspect, and I'm learning very quickly, that there are other ways to deliver on that good soil structure, get the earthworm numbers up. In fact, we were discussing earlier, I can remember when I first started ploughing with my Zeta Crystal 8045 and a 4-furrow plough, you were followed by seagulls and other birds. You don't see that anymore. The worms aren't there for them to eat. So, that's a good way, I think, that we can go back to improving soil health and how we can measure that. And I've seen the work from the AHDB showing how you can measure soil health. And
would the measurement of soil health in terms of its worm content, say, be one of the things that classes in the common good?
It could be. It could be, and that's why we're looking at how we can measure that. But we're looking at outcomes. So if having a better worm population means that you've got a more biodiverse bird environment, there's all sorts of things that flow from better soil health. Okay. So, as at this stage, I wouldn't envisage that paying for soil health was necessarily a public good, but the things that flow from that are the sort of public goods that people, I think, would want to pay for.
Okay, so one of the issues that I certainly have with the agriculture bill, and I think a lot of other people do, is that you farm to grow food. We have a big problem in our food system at the moment in that people don't eat enough fruit and vegetables, obesity levels are high, good food is too expensive, not being eaten, and yet food that there aren't within the current bill structure. You have the common good, which does not include food at the moment, and then in Clause 2 you talk about production without it being attached. So what is the role of food, which after all is what agriculture is all about, in the new agriculture bill? What is it? Is it about still industrial, or is it about something different?
Well, we got some criticism initially when the agriculture bill was published because it didn't specifically talk enough about food production, and I think there will be an amendment coming from the government in response to some of the other amendments put forward to make it absolutely clear that the purpose of UK agriculture is to produce good, nutritious food that people can afford, and we'll make that clear. So far as the rest of the food strategy, Michael Gove has appointed a guy called Henry Dimbleby, who you may have heard of, one of the founders of the Leon fast food chain, to actually develop a food strategy from farm to fork, looking at these issues, because in some of the communities, certainly in my constituency, you have families where food poverty is a problem, but obesity is also a problem. You have a big council estate in my constituency with, when they built it in the 1950s and before, massive gardens, because in those days people would grow their own vegetables in their gardens. Now you're lucky to find a rhubarb plant in the corner. Most of the gardens are used for storing second-hand washing machines by the look of it. So, how do we get, and we have this bizarre situation that we have allotment areas where the middle-class people are driving in their Range Rovers to grow the vegetables because the allotment areas are located next to the housing estates and the areas where the working-class people would have lived. And we've got this bizarre disjoint, and Henry's work is looking at how we can address that.
Okay. But within the agriculture bill, there isn't anything really going behind increasing the levels of horticulture in this country. I mean, horticulturalists at the moment, there are not enough of them, that, you know, they get squeezed by supermarkets because there's difficult outlets. Are you going to help them in some way?
Well, I mean, the horticultural sector and incidentally the intensive livestock sector are not sectors that have had a great deal of support from the taxpayer in the past. The agriculture bill is first and foremost about how we switch over from the common agricultural policy to our new system, which will involve direct payments to be phased out over 7 years, done in a simpler way, so we could not have maybe as much bureaucracy, able to do that in a way that the farmers can easily navigate, but ramping up over that same 7 years the environmental benefits. Some of the other sectors can stand up in their own right. If you look at the economics of British agriculture, you know, the profitability is about 3.7 billion. The support the taxpayer gives, or the European Union gives via the British taxpayer, is between, depending how you measure it, between 3.1 and 3.3. So there isn't much profitability in British agriculture. So, you know, the key message is that we do need, certainly at the moment, to deliver support to agriculture. Otherwise, we would see degradation of our industry, and that would result in degradation of the environment. But some of the other sectors are not specifically what we're looking at in the bill. It is about how we can deliver that support. And it, by the way, if we had a no-deal Brexit and we hadn't got the agriculture bill on the statute book, we could bring in emergency legislation to ensure that the BPS payments will be made next year. So we're doing a lot of no-deal planning. God forbid we have a no-deal, but if we did have no deal, we are ready to respond to that in other ways.
Okay, well, can we, one of the other obviously worries with people, with farmers, is that at the moment there's no numbers attached to any of this. So if you do soil management, if you do all the things right, are you going to get the same kind of equivalent that farmers get at the moment through the Common Agricultural Policy? I mean, as everyone says, the Treasury has their eye on this very large sum of money that is not going to be paid in the same way. How's it going to be decided? And actually, are you going to get enough money to exist or to really make a difference? Because the worrying stat always is that there's 80% of our food comes from 20% of our farms. So that 80% who are only producing 20% are in a very vulnerable position.
Well, we've guaranteed that the money will be available for this year and next year in terms of BPS.
It's not very long, though.
But it is important to bear in mind, for example, that as we leave the European Union, whatever figure you want to write on the side of a bus, that money will be available for us to deploy in the UK. And I think it's generally understood that agriculture is an industry that needs support. Now, I would actually argue that under the new scheme, it is those more marginal farmers, particularly those in the uplands, who stand to gain, because they are the environments we really want to support. Mm-hmm. You know, they are the areas when we can deliver that agricultural support. What I think we need to think very carefully about, and this is partly why we're doing the trials, partly why we're talking to eminent members of the House of Lords and others to work out how it's going to be. To what extent do we compensate people for what they've got already that we want to preserve? And to what extent do we incentivize new good behavior, new hedge planting, new tree planting, new carbon sinks, etc.? And that's the balance we'll have to talk at. But I believe we can make a good case to Treasury. And certainly, you know, looking at the sort of spending review figures, I think that there is a case to be made for continued agricultural support. Indeed, as I said at the beginning, you know, if we've got Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth behind us saying, no, we must deliver on this, because this isn't just to help farmers, this is to help the overall ecosystem and the environment.
I don't think anyone disputes that Defra is going to support farmers, but it's the question of whether they're getting 100 quid a year or 5,000 quid a year or 10,000 quid a year that feels extremely vague. And also the other worry is that there's no sense that you are guaranteed this for, say, a period of 10 years, when if what you're looking at is hedges, trees, trying to really change the way your farm is, you have to have certainty of X amount of money coming in every year.
Well, certainly the point I've made and the Treasury understands is that if you're getting farmers to sign up for 5, 7 or even longer schemes, that money needs to be there to enable that to be delivered. And indeed, you know, one of the major problems we've had in terms of incentivizing agri-environmental schemes is the fact the money wasn't coming through because of the the way that the system was being administered, the way that the European Commission were insisting on particularly difficult to reach parameters to free up that money. I'm very pleased that Michael Gove has agreed with the Treasury. This money can be released and the farmers are going to get their money by the end of next month, which, and then we'll argue with the Commission once we process them later. So, you know, the Treasury has stuck their necks out, but that money will get there. Because my worry was, talking to farmers at some of the shows this year, is that, well, you know, I've got an agri-environmental scheme. I'm owed £110,000 on my estate. I'm not going to encourage my friends and neighbours to sign up to the scheme. So we do need to ensure that, one, the money is paid on time. And indeed, one of the suggestions I've made, which I hope will be followed through, is that rather than have these big lump sums dropping into people's bank accounts on certain calendar dates, or sometimes in many cases days after those certain calendar dates, we should go into a monthly payment scheme, so farmers who may be used to milk checks can understand how that helps their cash flow. Probably not good news for the machinery people out there, because I know in my part of the world people get their BPS payments in January. Their accountants usually have their accounts sorted out round about then, and then they decide, well, we'll save some tax by buying some machinery. I think actually delivering these schemes which don't involve one-off big payments, it involves, you know, maintenance and work throughout the year. I think moving to a system where we would pay people monthly on these agri-environmental schemes would be very widely welcomed across the industry and help people manage their businesses and manage their cash flow.
So do you think that this new agriculture bill will help move us in terms of the 80% of the big farms, who farm in a very industrial, agri-tech way with a lot of high-tech stuff and a lot of chemicals going on the land? Will that move that kind of farming? Because you know, everything we know about biodiversity loss, soil loss, and the impact that not too long, I mean, climate change targets are going to be put on the agricultural sectors, it's said, within the next year and a half. Do you think that as a government, as a ministry, you're doing enough to move this in the right direction?
For this scheme to work, it will have to apply and work on every farm in the country. And indeed, I was at quite a large estate in Cleveland near Middlesbrough the other day, and they're very high tech. They've all their sort of GPS systems, and the farmer there was telling me, well, I can do a yield map of my farm based on the information that my combine relates to, you know, a contour map of the farm based on yield. He said, and so if you're going to pay me £80 an acre to grow nectar plants, I can draw a map of my farm showing the bits where I can actually make more money getting £80 an acre, so those bits of the farm that don't yield as well. And if you give me £120 an acre, I can draw another map showing more area. So, you know, I think farmers are going to be very savvy as how they plug into these schemes to ensure that it does improve the bottom line. But I know from experience on my farm, we've got a stewardship scheme. It works very well, and actually farmers I talk to, they want to talk about their, you know, what they've seen in their nectar plots and which bird species they've got. You know, farmers are actually, you know, very keen to deliver on the environment because it's something they're really interested in. Some of them, of course, have interest in shooting various birds as well, so that's another incentive for them. But I'm convinced that farmers will step up to the mark, and they will see not only that it works financially for them, but it works in terms of convincing the taxpayer that the money they're putting in is money well spent and delivering things that they want to see on the farms, which has not been the problem in the past. We've seen, you know, large agri-businesses farming in very unsustainable ways, getting very big checks. We want to see them delivering not only good quality food, good incomes for their farms and their communities, but also delivering those public goods, things like public access, the habitats, the carbon sinks, the water management, all those things that we need to work very carefully to make sure that as the pilots deliver that evidence, we can do that in an intelligent way.
Okay. I'm going to open up shortly, but I just wanted to ask what your view is about, or how you think you should restore local farming networks, local food networks. One of the things we've lost so tragically over the years is all the local abattoirs. And it seems without local abattoirs, it's very hard to build a local food network, which has many benefits, including social, psychological, introducing kids to food, etc., etc. Is that part of the plan?
Well, I think supporting rural communities, I would argue, is a public good. And indeed, if you see in some other countries where agribusiness has taken over, they're not buying their tractors from their local dealers.
No.
They're not, bringing up families in those areas. So I think my view is, and it's something that we'll have to talk about as we deliver this policy, my view is that some local communities are part of that public good, so that if for no other reason, if people decide to go on a holiday on the North Yorkshire moors, there is a shop and a pub and places open, because what's happening in some parts of the country is that because of the difficulties for people getting those businesses over the winter when there aren't the tourists there. So I think there is an argument to be made about how we support communities. But
would you invest in local abattoirs, for instance?
well, I mean, funny, when we were children, we had an abattoir and 2 butcher shops. And the reason, of course, that is given why local abattoirs are shut is partly because of European regulations and the suggestion, which I think we should plead guilty to, that we've maybe gold-plated some of that regulation in the UK. But of course, other things have happened. We've seen, for example, the big supermarkets wanting even higher standards in some of their slaughterhouses. We had the crazy situation in North Yorkshire where a consortium of hill farmers with really good quality North Yorkshire lamb did a deal with one of the big supermarkets, but the supermarket's abattoir that they had licensed signed off to be their, I think it was Asda, to be their abattoir, was in North Wales. So these animals are being transported to Wales to be slaughtered. We also, of course, have the situation that we're trying to develop export markets, and we had the Chinese across last week. I signed a deal with them on beef exports, and they came to look at our lamb slaughterhouses because they wanted to check that they were high standards. So I think there is a part to be played maybe in trying to help some small slaughterhouses, but we need to make sure we don't take our eye off the ball in terms of food hygiene and food standards, and that is one of the problems. Now, one area that we could look at when we've left the European Union is whether we need to have vets in. This is quite contentious if you're a vet.
Yes.
And this is not government policy, but something I think we need to look at. When I was in the European Parliament, we made a suggestion that rather than having vets in slaughterhouses, we should create a new profession of veterinary meat inspector. And indeed, when I spoke to my vet, I said, during your time training to learn how to, do hysterectomies on cats and deliver calves and all those amazing things vets do, I said, how much time did you study actually working in a slaughterhouse to spot problems there? And she said, oh, well, maybe a week out of the 5 years. So I think that there could be a case to be made to have a new profession of veterinary meat inspector, which means that the cost of having the vet in the slaughterhouse could come down, which would help the sustainability of the small slaughterhouses. There are some remote parts of the country where, animals have to travel longer distances than they should. And I think there could be arguments there made as well from a welfare point of view. We also have the crazy situation that there is no slaughterhouse on the Isle of Wight. So all the stock on the Isle of Wight have to be transported across the Solent to be slaughtered. I get lobbied about that. So I think these are things we could look at, but animal welfare is very important, but also food hygiene. And we could not have a situation where we lowered our standards because we have tremendous confidence with the British people in terms of our meat. We've got the Chinese now agreeing to take our beef and hopefully take our lamb very soon. They're desperate to buy pork. They've had 1 million pigs slaughtered.
They've got more pigs in any other country, haven't they?
But they've got African swine fever, and they've had to destroy 1 million pigs.
Yeah, well, that is the problem with industrial pig farming or any animal farming. Anyway, I could go on about that.
African swine fever, the big problem in Europe is actually with wild boar, who are spreading the disease, and the big problem in China is the backyard pigs, because people are feeding them food scraps. So whilst I can understand if you get a disease into a big herd, it can be a problem, but the biggest problem we have in China is due to people keeping 1 or 2 pigs at the back of their house and feeding them food scraps, which can be then the vector for the disease. The big problem in Europe is wild boar, which are carrying disease round, and indeed the Danes are building a fence to stop German wild boar going into Denmark to spread the disease.
God, I hope that's not the start of something else as well. Okay, can we have a question right here in the front?
And yes, obviously, roving mic, keep the question short, please.
And we've got 10 minutes, basically, so thank you.
Andrew Ross. Next Tuesday, the Green Finance Institute is being launched in the Guildhall, and that is to accelerate the issue of green bonds in the UK. The UK is 17th in the world ranking here. And this institute has the backing of HM Treasury with Claire Perry and John Glenn from Treasury. Theresa May has committed us to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And agriculture is responsible for 25% of global emissions.
30.
Will you encourage HM Treasury to enable environmental land management scheme payments to underpin the issue of green bonds in the UK to pay all the farmers here twice as much than they're getting from the CAP at the moment?
Thank you, Alan.
Well, that's got to be a very popular thing to say, isn't it?
Well, it is very popular.
I mean, actually, before I was appointed to this department, I spent a year on the Environmental Audit Committee, and it was one of the issues that we looked at, the whole issue of green finance, and we published a report.
Yeah.
And the committee was particularly critical of UK overseas aid and the type of project that they were backing, which weren't necessarily the most environmentally friendly projects in those countries. I mean, there are already 100 green bonds listed on the UK, on the London Stock Exchange, totaling more than $26 billion across 7 currencies. So that does demonstrate the strength of the British capital markets to deliver that sort of thing. We've also seen increased domestic activity in this area, including assurances from Anglian Water, Barclays, Thames Tideway and SSE. So I think that green bonds have been instrumental in delivering green finance. And I think that because of the way that London is such a centre for finance and investment, I think we're well placed as a country in a good place. And I think if people do invest in green bonds, they need to do it not just for altruistic reasons, they need to do it because it makes good common sense to invest in these technologies. In the same way we had bonds that wouldn't, for example, invest in armaments or tobacco. You know, for those to be successful, it needed to be a good investment as well as being an ethical investment that made the investors feel good.
Great, okay.
Do it for agriculture.
Well, I mean, you'd have to see, I mean, if farmers are raising capital for example, tree planting, then they could look at the markets as how that might be done, and green bonds could be a way through that. It would depend upon the parameters that the green investment fund that managed the bond set in order to make sure that they were actually genuinely a green bond and not just this sort of greenwash that we often see many businesses engaged in. You know, you're a parcel delivery company and you've got one electric van and you put it on every single litre.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Hi, I'm Jackie from Rothamsted. Scientists have shown that financial mechanisms reduce pro-environmental behaviour by eroding green self-identity. Is policy going to use science or finance to support behaviour changes in the community?
Well, I think science and finance have a part to be played, and indeed, you know, the trials that we're doing will demonstrate, you know, what does actually deliver greening and what doesn't. I'll give you one example from my farm. We had a 6-acre field in the next parish over a beck, and the bridge to this field wasn't strong enough to carry a Class Lexion combine, so we put it into set-aside. And it was great, lots of, you know, and it's been set aside about 15 years now, and it's actually becoming quite a nice environment, and you've got bullfinches, there's quite a lot of bushes starting to grow. I then got a letter from the Rural Payments Agency saying our satellite has spotted that this field is no longer suitable for grazing or arable crops because you've got these bushes growing in part of it, and we've disallowed a hectare. So I rang them up and said, well, what can I do? He said, well, if you can go in with a scrub basher and destroy all this stuff that's growing, you can then claim the money on it. So we've got these bizarre sort of unintended consequences which we need to try and avoid. So you know, I'm very optimistic that these environmental land management schemes will be based not only on science, but also make financial sense for the farmer. We also, I think, need to think carefully about how the money the farmers get is not only compensation for income foregone and investment made, but also gives them a profit margin on doing that. Otherwise, why would they do that if they're only being compensated for what they're doing?
Okay. Question there, yeah.
Real nice, simple one. Andrew Russell, Catchment Sensitive Farming. When can we expect countryside productivity to be launched so that we can, get some environmental things going with the farmers that we're working on air quality?
Well, we obviously, before we can deliver our policy, we need to leave the European Union, and that's something I've voted 3 times to do already this year. We have two people putting their names forward to be the next Prime Minister. But before we can deliver all these things, we need to deliver Brexit. We need to, again, give ourselves the freedom and get on with delivering environmental and management. And I think the 7-year transition will give farmers a chance to adapt, to understand what they've got to do, and enable us to deliver that. So I'm optimistic we can do that, but we do need to leave the European Union, and I hope leave in an orderly way through a transition agreement and an implementation period, which gives us a chance to adapt to those changes as well.
Okay. Where is the mic? Okay, I'm afraid this has to be the last question because the Minister has to leave. So thank you.
Good morning, Minister. Paul Kaywood, agronomist from Cheshire. In your remarks, you made a few mentions of Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth. I was just wondering how much influence they have on future policy.
We need to listen to Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth because they represent a lot of people in this country who take the environment very seriously. But what we need to do as well, and you're an agronomist, we need to make sure that what we do is based on science. And that if we use the precautionary principle, we need to use it in the correct way, not the way that some other people might want to see us use it. And if I could mention one word, Roundup. A lot of the systems we've seen, these sustainable systems, reducing the amount of diesel we burn, reducing the amount of cultivations we do, many of those systems would not work if we didn't have Roundup as a cost-effective, low-carbon way of managing some of the weed species we have out there. So I'm very keen that we move forward to green our agriculture, but to do so in a scientifically sustainable way as well as an environmentally sustainable way.
Minister, thank you very much indeed for giving us your time. And we look forward to this agriculture bill has been sitting in a cupboard in the Commons for what now seems like months and months and months. Any clues as to when it might tiptoe out and come my way?
I'm frustrated, Rosie, as you are, we haven't got the bill back into process. And you'll know as a member of the Posh Chamber that when at the moment, it's a bit like being on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire at 32,000. You can't fall any lower. So we're at the stage,
that's good to know.
We've done the committee stage, and so if, for example, we had a new parliamentary session, we could carry that over. If we start again and go into the Lord's procedure and we have the report stage, and we do have a new session, we would lose. We wouldn't just drop to 32,000, we'd drop to nothing.
So you mean all the amendments that have been put in at the moment would fall out?
But not just that. All the work we've done in committee would have to be redone. So at the moment we're at a point that if we did have a new parliamentary session, which is being speculated about, we could then carry that over into the new session and start from where we are now. If we started on Monday next week to do the report stage and the Lord's amendments, and there was, for whatever reason, Mr. Hunter, I hope it would be, announces that we'd have a new session, all the work would be lost, we'd go back, we'd have to have the first reading and everything else. So that's why we're cautious, because we don't want to lose all the work that's been done. We are continuing to look at the amendments. Indeed, I was at a meeting with Liam Fox, in particular, talking about some of the amendments on trade. As you know how these things work, you get amendments which the government quite likes, but we tend to get our lawyers to redraft them so that they're going to work better. So we are looking at some of the amendments, and quite a few of them are ones that we think are very sensible, we'd like to bring forward. But at the moment, we're in this sort of limbo situation, and the same applies to the fisheries bill, that if we started the process now, and suddenly something happened, we'd lose everything.
Right. Okay. Well, on that incredibly cheery note, thank you very, very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to Rosie Boycott.
Now, Sue Pritchard.
And the conversation will carry on here, Rosie and Sue Pritchard. Then William Kendall says, stay right there, don't go anywhere.
Sue Pritchard, who is the chair of the RSA's Food, Farming and Countryside Report, which has been going on now for about 2 years, and is hugely informing both the work of the agriculture policy, also the work of the food policy, which Henry is launching today, which is why he's not here. So I'm sorry people are scooting around. It's obviously a busy week for food. But Sue, how did this come about, and what was your aim?
So this particular commission... Technology. I can normally shout loud enough. As a farmer myself, slightly different farmer to Robert, I'm an organic farmer, a small organic permaculture farmer in Wales, so we might have a different perspective on how the system's supporting us at the moment, but we'll come back to that, I'm sure, later. So the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission was established 2 years ago with a very generous grant from the Esme Fairbairn Foundation in response to the Brexit vote. So a group of industry, sector and NGO leaders got together recognising that the vote to leave the European Union was going to be extremely serious for the sector, for the countryside and for rural communities, and decided, since government at that time was not minded to do anything about that, decided to approach Esme for some independent funding for a more encompassing inquiry. So our mandate is to shape a new vision for the future of food, farming and countryside. And in the 2 years that we've been working, we have become very, very clear that whilst Brexit is a huge issue, there are serious issues that are bigger than Brexit: climate change, ecosystem breakdown, but also issues in the whole food system. There's a huge rise in diet-related ill health and mental ill health and loneliness that are features of a fractured society and a broken food system. And we've rolled all of those questions into our inquiry. We've spent the last year travelling the UK on a bicycle, going to those places that you simply can't get to by public transport, but more importantly, to be able to go out to meet people on farms in the countryside and communities where they are, to talk to them about what really matters to them. And we've conducted more detailed inquiries in the devolved nations, in the home nations, and in 3 counties in England, in Lincolnshire, in Cumbria and in Devon. And the results of all of those inquiries, working with experts, academics and people who have a huge interest in the whole food system, is being written up right now. I have to sign off the report tomorrow, and we launch it on the 16th of July.
Great. So there's such a lot in that to unpick, but I think that the fact that you are seeing it in the context both of social deprivation or social, abundance, as well as climate change. What do you think are the big conclusions? One always says you can't really solve the problem of climate change unless we get some equality and fairness into a system. And is that what you saw, and how do you see we address that?
Absolutely. And we have arrived at exactly that conclusion. So we've landed... can we agree Chatham House rules, and this will not be tweeted? I don't want to spoil my own launch in 2 weeks' time, but, it seems pointless not talking about exactly what we're about to say. So we have 3 big sets of recommendations. The first says that healthy food is everybody's business, and we need a fair food system. We need to level the playing field for a fair food system. The second is that farming can be a force for change. I often get very frustrated listening to conversations in Westminster and Whitehall, which makes farmers the problem. And as a farmer, I find that quite distressing and really quite alienating. In my view, and in the view of the Commission, farming can be a force for change of the 4th agricultural revolution. And the third set of recommendations is under the heading "The Countryside Can Work for All," for a new regenerative economy. And so in the first set, healthy food is everybody's business, We talk about levelling the playing field, about rebalancing what is currently a ridiculously and dangerously imbalanced food system, in which global agribusinesses are now probably the biggest risk to people and planetary health. And that's not just me saying that.
No.
World Health Organization uses that precise quote. And that urgently needs addressing and rebalancing. And we talk about the role of the state, the role of public procurement to use all of the levers at its disposal to help change that system. We talk about the importance of local food systems, and we recommend community food plans. Now, you mentioned that Henry's leading a new national food strategy. Any national strategy is only as good as capacity for implementation, and that is largely on the ground in communities. So we're calling for community food plans devised with citizens and with producers to really revitalise the local food systems that we think are much more sustainable and frankly much more resilient in the faces of the challenges in front of us. In the Farming as a Force for Change, when we call for the fourth agricultural revolution, we have pretty squarely come down on the side of an agroecological future. And we talk about the sorts of things that we think government needs to support in that context. Growing healthy, affordable food sustainably, really encouraging the production of fruit, of veg, of nuts, of whole grains, as well as sustainable livestock production. We've tried to bridge the gap between the vegan movement and the livestock movement to find some common ground and consensus where we can all move forward. And then the last, perhaps the thing I should mention is that we're calling for the foundation of a national agroecology development bank, because it is essential that the finance is there to create a fair and just transition, and that farmers at the moment who struggle to get some of the finance that they need, or where it's offered in ways that feel really separate from their concerns, can access really good funding, along with the development of regional and mutual banks to get the finance they need for that kind of development.
Okay, so going back up, in a way, up to the beginning, all through these things, how much do you think that the new look agriculture policy is supporting that?
So there's lots to commend it. Let's start from there. So that's good. It's a bit of a framework bill. It's kind of light on detail. It has focused enormously on environmental gains, which are really good and really important, but possibly at the expense of understanding what that means for more sustainable food production. Kind of light on that. The definition of public goods worries me. We're locked into a very narrow economist's definition of what constitutes a public good. I find that really rather unhelpful and a little bit worrying. This is a kind of wonky bit of our report, policy wonk bit of our report, but we say that public money for public goods is good as far as it goes, but there is so much more money in the system, and there is so much more that people really value that fall out of that definition of public goods, that's the conversation we need to be having. Question I ask myself all of the time, and I've been doing this research for 2 years, where's the money? Where is all the money in this really quite significant?
Well, the money's in the processing.
Well, yes, the money,
to a huge
absolutely.
degree.
The money is in the processing, yes. And the processing that turns commodity crops into ultra-processed food, which is driving the massive rise in diet-related ill health. And that's absolutely got to be challenged and tackled. And that's got to be dealt with actually on a global basis.
So that's sort of what I was going to come on to. At the moment, the COPs and all the environment meetings, and including, as far as I can see, this one coming up at the UN in September, they are talking 90% about energy and 10% about the food system. Is this, do you think, because people haven't got a clue what to do and it's so complicated? or, I mean, now 60% of biodiversity, and I would disagree with the figure before. I mean, I think it's 30% agriculture puts into CO2. So it's not just an elephant in the room, it's a herd of elephants in the room.
Absolutely.
And yet completely not talked about.
Yeah. That's a really, really good question. I suspect that the answer is because we are terrified by the stat that we get challenged with all the time, which is that we need to feed 9 billion people in 10 years' time. And so the people who run agribusinesses and some farmers make huge claims for their version of farming with that stat at the foreground.
And we're the only way you can do that.
The only way you can do this is by industrializing, intensifying, more vertical consolidation. So the industrial mindset is driving a version of farming with that threat in mind. But the truth is, the world already produces more than enough calories for everybody on the planet to eat healthily. The problem is that it's wasted, it's inequitably distributed, and the processes are opaque, just not transparent. Now, those are the issues that I think we need to deal with. And we are seeking, as part of our commission, and encouraging everybody that we work with to do the same, to find and forge those progressive global alliances so that we can work with other countries to confront what is otherwise a really unwieldy system controlled by fewer and fewer companies, which are completely outwith any national policy considerations. So I was in Stockholm a couple of weeks ago. I was with the Danish ministers this week. And I think we're all finding that same common cause. It is critical that progressives find progressives and confront that particular mindset and direction of travel, because that's the one that's got us where we are today.
And, okay, we can do it here. Do you think that when you go into these conversations that the UK still has leadership power?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think people may have noticed that our politics is in a bit of a mess at the moment. And we are losing, I think, a lot of credibility on the world stage. And I think I also want to just challenge, just momentarily, that stat that Robert offered us right at the start, that somehow Europe has held us back from doing the things that we now want to do. That's simply not the case. So the Economist Intelligence Unit, that's not a kind of mad left-wing institution, has just published its Sustainability Index for 2019. In terms of sustainable agriculture, France is number 1 on the list. The UK is 24 on the list. And we perform at the bottom of the European League on many sustainability measures.
What are their measures for giving France that accolade?
So they measure across 3 features: around waste, around nutrition, and around sustainable agriculture, sustainable farming. And there are many
indicators in that
within each of those. But and where we fall back on most, we're not doing too badly on waste. We fall back on nutrition and farming, because we're enthralled to an intensive food system and an intensive farming system. And those are the areas that we really have to challenge.
And you discovered, obviously, I'm going to open it up to everybody else in a minute, but just one last question. You discovered, I know, a lot of real inequality about what people eat and real levels of food poverty.
Yes.
Do you think that we should, in terms of how we change that, do we subsidize vegetables at the point of production? Do we subsidize them at the point of consumption? Do we introduce some kind of great big VAT on everything else? Do you see, how do you see us moving that and actually moving it really fast before we lose another generation to ill health? Because the data is now, you're going to be dead by the difference between being well-fed and being not well-fed as a kid is now, it's 19 years for a woman, you know
it's horrifying.
Living unhealthily. It's
and if
terrible.
you're poor, it's worse.
It's much worse.
The poorest
it's terrible.
people in our community are having to carry the biggest risks
Burden of
to their
disease.
health. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a really, really good question. And we say you have to act across all those spaces. You have to support and really amplify the production of healthy food. So farmers need to be supported to grow more of the good stuff. We need to challenge advertising, marketing. So The 9 o'clock watershed for advertising to children, absolutely, we support that. We really support the active marketing of vegetables and fruit so that there's as much attention placed on them as there is on, a teddy bear biscuit. And we have to level the playing field. We have to absolutely level the playing field between what is healthy and sustainable and what is, at the moment, profitable for certain sorts of agribusiness. And we talk about taxation, we talk about regulation, and from production through to consumption.
Okay. I'm going to open it up to come there, and then I'd like to come back to Alan to talk about the green bonds. I'll just take a question from, I think I can see who it is. Nick.
Hello. Nick Jeffries from the
Hi,
Ellen MacArthur Foundation. I'm very interested in this idea of finance as a bridging mechanism for farmers to make the step from conventional farming to more ecological farming. So could you tell me a little bit more about how the National Agroecology Bank might work?
The Agroecology Investment Bank.
Yes. Yeah. Is that sort of low cost? Is that low interest loans, or is it payment for? Is that low cost loans, or is it payment for ecosystem services? How will that work?
So we think it's got two roles, as a wholesale and as a retail function. It needs to support as a wholesale bank, perhaps a little bit more risk taking, a little bit more innovation amongst other lenders, but also it can. We envisage that it will provide support direct. It'll be very focused on generating agroecological outcomes and helping. It'll do things like help people move from maybe the capital-intensive businesses that they're currently in. People are locked into systems. People have invested in good faith in systems that were developed to respond to the policy levers at the time. So it will help people through that process. It will invest in new capital-intensive systems, things like agroforestry. It's actually quite expensive to invest in agroforestry, and you're committing to a future that you may not see a return from for 10 years. So we're expecting it will do a huge range of things. The detail will need to be worked up from here. We've already obviously started working with bankers and economists to advise, but it's a serious undertaking, and we'll be working up more detail from here.
This would be a wholly separate bank?
Yes, wholly separate, yeah.
Alan, do you have anything you want to contribute to that?
Andrew Ross.
Sorry.
Okay, no problem at all. The Minister made it really very clear that there is no financial commitment to environmental land management schemes post-Brexit, ex-CAP.
Well, there's no commitment to the amount of money.
Yeah, no, quite. No commitment is no commitment. There was a commitment, though, last night on Newsnight with Emily Maitlis asking a question of Jeremy Hunt and Boris Johnson that was picked up on the Today programme this morning, that the cost of their projects is between 35 billion and 65 billion. So you can see the scale of the gap here. There is no prospect that agriculture is going to get its 3 billion for these projects. So how is that funding going to come in to this arena? And here's where, if I may, here is exactly where the finance market is incredibly well positioned. And following the Paris Climate Change Agreement, the commitment is, across the whole of the world's banks, to invest a minimum of 1 trillion by 2020 and 100 trillion by 2030. Mark Carney and the Financial Stability Board has supported that too. So here is the place and the role in which green finance and green bonds, and you say we're 24th in the league in certification compared to France, we're 17th in the world for issuing green bonds here. So here's the opportunity for regenerative agriculture collectively to be able to inspire or use the green bond market to issue bonds and pay all these farmers 2 or 3 times more than they're getting at the moment to do the very thing that they're loving to do anyway,
Great, Alan.
So we absolutely agree, and that's why we've established some financial instruments within our report to support that. The National Agroecology Development Bank, which will raise... It will use a variety of instruments to generate the finance that's needed for a just transition. The green bonds aren't, they're one really, really important instrument. But I also want to pick up on that earlier point that you made, that there's somehow not enough public money to go around. I'm afraid I don't buy that. I've worked in government policy and major projects for 20 years and have found numerous occasions when public money has been found for what you might call flagship projects. And at the moment, the projected overspend on HS2 alone could fund a very radical and transformative agroecological system. So, well, that's about public mandate, isn't it?
Okay, thank you, Sue, very much. I'm afraid we have to stop now because we're going to have William Kendall on supermarkets. So don't move because the morning goes on. But Sue, thank you so much for coming. And we can get the report on the 16th.
16th is here.
Fantastic. We look forward.
Grim.